My mom slept with my husband. It turned out to be his exit strategy. I still don't know which one of them is worse. I was so sure we had the perfect life. I swear, always. I'm 32 now, and I always considered myself a lucky person. I had Jonathan. We got married 8 years ago. He's not, a hero from a romantic comedy, but more reliable. Calm. He always knew exactly what he wanted, and everything in our life was planned out. A big house in the suburbs, 2 dogs, stable IT job for him, publishing for me. We never fought. Seriously, even small disagreements seemed to resolve themselves. We were that couple everyone looked at and said, now that's a real family. And my mom, Patricia, she liked him. A lot. She always said Jonathan was my greatest stroke of luck and that I should cherish him. My mom and I were always close. She lived nearby, and we saw each other almost every day. She loved Jonathan, and he, it seemed, returned the affection. For me, it was just part of our perfect picture. Me, Jonathan, Mom. Everything was fine. It all started about a month ago. Mid-October. Jonathan was going through a very intense project at work. He always worked a lot, but this time, he was seriously up until 2 in the morning in the home office. I tried not to bother him, I understood how important it was. Mom started coming over more often during this time. At first, it was just regular visits. Bringing me something from the bakery, helping with the garden. But then it started to be, more frequent and longer. She might arrive at lunchtime and only leave in the evening, after Jonathan finished dinner and went back to his study. Initially, I didn't see anything strange in it. Mom is getting older, she's lonely after Dad's death. She needs company. And Jonathan, he was always so polite, so attentive. He could talk to her about her gardening, her health. He knew how to listen, which was very important to her. Honestly, I was glad they had such a good relationship. It made my life easier. While I was in meetings or finishing an article, Mom could look after the house, just be around. But about 2 weeks ago, I started noticing they were spending too much time together. Not just sitting in different rooms, but actually together. I might walk into the kitchen and find them sitting at the table, leaning over something. When I asked what was going on, they both, looked away too quickly and said they were discussing some nonsense, like a new watering system or a recipe. Their tones were, kind of fake. Too casual. I put it down to my own fatigue back then. I guess I just imagined it. We're family. Nothing could be going on. However, it kept happening. Once, twice, 3 times. I started seeing Jonathan, instead of going to his office when I was busy, staying in the living room with Mom. They could just be sitting and looking at their phones, but between them, there was this strange, thick silence. Not comfortable, but tense. Like they were both waiting for me to leave. And when I approached, they separated, as if on cue. Mom suddenly remembered she had to rush home, and Jonathan abruptly buried himself in his laptop. It was weird. I even started to think they were hiding something from me. Maybe they were planning a surprise? Birthday, anniversary? But my birthday wasn't for another 6 months. My biggest nightmare started last Friday. About 2 weeks into this. Jonathan said he had a very important meeting downtown and would be back late. I was home alone. Mom called during the day, said she would bring me some of her preserves. She arrived around 6 in the evening. We sat, talked about work. She left around 8. I went to the bedroom to read. It was about 11 o'clock. I heard the front door open. It was Jonathan. I decided to go meet him. I walked into the hallway and saw him. He was standing by the door, but he hadn't taken off his coat. He was just standing and staring at one spot. He had a small gym bag in his hands. He looked, not like someone after a hard day's work, but like someone who had made an important, irreversible decision. His face was pale, his eyes empty. I walked up to him. Asked what was wrong. And he, without looking at me, said, "I'm leaving, Elizabeth." Those words, they just knocked me off my feet. I couldn't believe my ears. 8 years, and just like that, without a fight, without a hint. I started asking why. He just stood there. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." I grabbed his arm, and then he looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a cold detachment, and, strangely, relief. He turned away, took a step toward the door. And then I, in a panic, screamed, "You're going to her, aren't you?" "Who is she, Jonathan?" He stopped, turned around, and at that moment, his eyes met mine. He gave a crooked smirk, a kind of vicious, yet weary smile. And he answered, quietly, almost a whisper, "Yes, to her. To Patricia." I didn't understand. At first, I thought I misheard. What Patricia? Does he know someone by that name? And then it hit me. Patricia is my mom. My mother. At that moment, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. My entire perfect life crumbled in an instant. He wasn't just leaving. He was leaving for my mom. I stood there, frozen. And he, without waiting for a reply, just walked out. He closed the door behind him. I was left alone in the empty hallway with this terrible, dirty secret. I was in shock, in a stupor. It was worse than a punch. It was, a triple betrayal. Husband, mother, and our entire perfect life. I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream. I just stood and stared at the closed door, trying to understand how this could have even happened. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Mom didn't answer. The next morning, I couldn't process a single piece of information. I just sat on the couch. The phone rang. It was Patricia. She spoke very softly, as if she felt guilty. But there was this strange, steel note in her voice. She didn't apologize. She just said, "Elizabeth, you have to understand this. We didn't want it to happen like this. But we love each other." Love? She, my mother, is telling me, her daughter, that she loves my husband? It was so insane, so absurd, that I laughed. And only then did I cry. I asked her, "Mom, why? Why?" And she said this sentence, which I still remember, "He left. For her." But, honey, he didn't go to her. He went from you. I hung up. He went from you. What did that mean? Did he just use my mom to make a graceful exit? To avoid taking responsibility for a divorce? It was so low. And my mom? She couldn't resist the attention she hadn't received in years. She just gave in to it. I sat there thinking that they were both just monsters. And I was just a pawn in their dirty game. This was only the beginning. And I knew it wasn't the end. I needed to understand how they could do this, and why it took only a month. Exactly 1 month to destroy my entire life. The shock from the initial blow didn't let up. It wasn't one of those dramatic, TV show breakdowns where you throw things and scream. It was a cold, internal freeze. I spent the next 2 days in a blur. Jonathan didn't call. Mom didn't call, except for that one time when she dropped the bombshell that he went from me. I took a few days off work, lying that I had the flu. The silence in the house was suffocating. I kept seeing them everywhere. On the couch where they sat pretending to watch TV. In the kitchen, where they had their secret talks over a simple mug of coffee. Every corner of the house was tainted. The weirdest thing was my reaction. I wasn't just angry, I was obsessed with understanding how. How could 2 people, whom I trusted implicitly, orchestrate this in such a short amount of time? I needed to reconstruct the timeline of this betrayal, this affair. It only took a month from the moment I first noticed them spending unusual amounts of time together to the moment Jonathan walked out with a gym bag. A month. That's lightning fast for an affair, especially one that leads to walking out of an 8-year marriage and moving in with your mother-in-law. It smelled wrong, too rushed, too efficient. I decided I needed to talk to someone, but who? My friends loved Jonathan. They adored the idea of my perfect family. Telling them the truth, that my husband abandoned me for my mother, felt like throwing gasoline on my own burning life. I knew the judgment would be immediate, and the pity unbearable. So, I kept it inside. This silence, this forced isolation, it just compounded the tension. I started reviewing that last month, playing back every interaction, every look, every seemingly innocent conversation. I realized now that the casualness was their shield. They never fought, never seemed uncomfortable around each other when I was present. They were masters of maintaining a boring, steady normalcy. And that's what made it so effective, so easy to miss. My first real move was contacting Jonathan. I didn't call, I couldn't bear the sound of his voice. I sent him a text message, something dry and transactional: "We need to discuss the house, finances, and divorce. Where can we meet?" He replied within 5 minutes, which surprised me. He suggested his lawyer's office next Tuesday. Cold, professional. The man I loved for 8 years was now just a business contact. But what truly fueled my obsession was the financial angle. Jonathan's job was good, but we had the house, mortgages, and 2 car payments. Where were they living? Did he move into Mom's small, 2-bedroom condo? That seemed a strange move for a man who valued space and privacy as much as Jonathan did. And what about my mom? She had a decent retirement fund, but not enough to sustain 2 people, especially not Jonathan's lifestyle. I decided to look into our joint accounts. I had online access to everything. I went through the statements for the past month. Nothing immediately obvious. No huge cash withdrawals, no sudden large purchases, no jewelry. Just the usual bills, groceries, dog food. Then I looked at the credit cards. And that's where I found a tiny flicker of something off. About 10 days before he left, a substantial charge, around $3,000, was made at a high-end furniture store. The kind of store we usually only went to for one expensive piece every few years. I didn't recognize the name of the place. Why would he buy $3,000 worth of furniture 10 days before leaving me? And for what? My mom's condo was fully furnished. I knew I couldn't ask Jonathan directly, he'd shut down. So, I called Mom. I used the excuse of needing a sentimental piece of her old garden furniture. She sounded guarded, but not hostile. I asked if she had any new furniture. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Oh, just a small, cheap dresser for the hallway, honey. Nothing worth mentioning." A small, cheap dresser. $3,000. My internal alarms were ringing like crazy. Then, there was the change in Jonathan's appearance. About 2 weeks before he left, he suddenly started wearing new clothes. Not a lot, just a few new shirts and a jacket, all slightly more trendy, less corporate than his usual attire. When I commented on it, he just shrugged and said his old stuff was getting worn out. Now, looking back, it felt like he was preparing for a new life. Her life? The thing about "he went from you" was stuck in my head like a poison dart. Why would my own mother say that? Was she trying to justify her actions by making me the villain? I spent a horrible, sleepless night convinced that I was a terrible wife, that I had driven him away with my focus on work and my lack of something. Maybe I hadn't been attentive enough. But then the rage would surge back. No matter how imperfect I was, it didn't justify this sick, manipulative betrayal with my own mother. This wasn't just about a marriage failing, it was about 2 people intentionally dismantling my sense of reality. I had the meeting with Jonathan's lawyer scheduled for Tuesday. I knew I had to prepare. I gathered all the financial documents. The $3,000 furniture purchase. The suspiciously frequent visits from Mom. The speed of his departure. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit the picture of a sudden, passionate, genuine affair. It felt cold. Calculated. I went to my mom's condo, unannounced. It was Saturday afternoon. I pretended I needed to borrow a specific old photo album. When she opened the door, she looked nervous, and the way she quickly moved to block the view into her living room was telling. But I saw enough. I saw the new small, cheap dresser in the hallway. It was dark wood, modern, and looked very much like it could be from that expensive store. But that wasn't the main thing. Behind her, in the corner of her tiny living room, I saw an unrolled blueprint on a low table, and beside it, a stack of very glossy brochures. Brochures for condos. Not for sale, but for new developments. And my mother, Patricia, who always complained about the noise and the distance of the suburbs, was looking at floor plans for a place with a 3-car garage. This didn't add up to a sudden, desperate affair in her 2-bedroom retirement haven. This was planning. Expensive, long-term, calculated planning. I knew in that moment, standing on the threshold of my mother's apartment, that the real story, the one that would truly break me, was not about passion or love. It was about something far uglier and more complicated. The truth was still hidden, but the tension was now suffocating. The wait until Tuesday felt like a year. I spent Sunday and Monday in a state of suspended animation, moving around the house like a ghost, but inside, my mind was a raging storm of calculations. The blueprints at Mom's condo. The $3,000 furniture charge. The speed of the departure. It all pointed to a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't a sudden, reckless romance, this was an exit strategy, a plan. And I was starting to see that my mother was more than just a willing participant, she was an accomplice. But why? I knew my game plan for the meeting at the lawyer's office had to be perfect. I couldn't just throw accusations, I needed to plant seeds of doubt, to watch their reactions, and to confirm my suspicions about the true nature of their arrangement. I walked into the conference room exactly at 10 a.m. It was cold, sterile, and smelled of cheap coffee. Jonathan was already there, sitting opposite his lawyer, a lean woman named Ms. Davies who looked like she hadn't smiled since 1998. Jonathan looked different. He was wearing one of his new, trendier jackets, and his hair was freshly cut. He looked rested, almost smug. He looked like a man who had successfully navigated a difficult corporate merger, not a man who had just destroyed his marriage and family. He didn't greet me. He just offered a curt, "Elizabeth." His detachment was so absolute that it actually helped calm my nerves. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was the enemy. The initial talk was all paperwork, assets, and liabilities. Ms. Davies spoke in a dull monotone, outlining the terms of a proposed settlement that was laughably one-sided in Jonathan's favor. He was claiming a significant majority of the marital assets, citing the emotional distress caused by the marriage's breakdown. The sheer audacity of the claim, considering he was the one who left me for my own mother, was a physical shock. I stayed quiet, letting them run their show, while I watched Jonathan. His face was a mask of calculated neutrality. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on his pen. Finally, when Ms. Davies paused for a breath, I leaned forward. I didn't raise my voice, I kept it low, steady, and dangerously calm. "Jonathan," I said, "I have one question before we proceed. It's about the debt." He looked up, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "We can discuss the mortgage payments later, Elizabeth." "No," I countered. "I'm talking about the $3,000 charge on the joint card, dated October 20th, to Northwood Interiors. It's not an installment plan, and it's not a bill. What exactly did you buy 10 days before walking out of the house?" Ms. Davies immediately jumped in. "Mrs. Miller, we are not here to discuss petty personal expenses. This is about the division of major assets." I ignored her, my eyes locked on Jonathan. "It's not petty. It's $3,000 of marital funds. And it's not in our house." "Is it in my mother's condo, Jonathan? Did you buy her a new bed to celebrate your new beginning?" The air in the room thickened instantly. Jonathan's composure cracked. His pen snapped in his hand. He went pale, then flushed deep red. That, he hissed, leaning across the table, his voice low and venomous, is none of your business. It was a gift. A $3,000 gift to my mother 10 days before you left me for her. That's a very generous gift, wouldn't you say? Especially when you're arguing for me to get almost nothing in the divorce. I let the words hang there, laced with disbelief. It looks less like a gift and more like a bribe. He slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. Stop this, Elizabeth. You're making a spectacle. Am I? I pressed, maintaining my unnerving calm. Or am I just pointing out the lack of transparency in your plan? Because that's what this feels like, Jonathan. A plan. A calculated exit. And I'm starting to think my mother wasn't the target of your affection, but the target of your convenience. Ms. Davies quickly interrupted, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. Jonathan was breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with fury, not the fury of a betrayed husband, but the fury of an exposed schemer. He demanded a break. We were separated into different waiting rooms. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had hit a nerve. The sheer force of his reaction confirmed that the furniture purchase was a key piece of their secret. But I still didn't know the whole picture. Later that same day, I did something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I drove to my mother's condo. I had to see her reaction after the lawyers' meeting. I knew Jonathan would have called her immediately, probably screaming about my questions. I rang the bell. Mom, Patricia, opened the door slowly. Her face was a landscape of anxiety and forced cheerfulness. She was wearing a new, brightly colored blouse that seemed completely out of character. Elizabeth. What a surprise, honey, she said, her voice too high. I need to talk, Mom. Just 5 minutes. I walked past her into the small living room. The room looked smaller now that I knew its dark secret. I saw the cheap dresser again. I sat down on the uncomfortable sofa. Jonathan and I had our first meeting with the lawyers today, I began, watching her eyes dart nervously around the room. Oh. Well, I hope it went smoothly, she mumbled, wringing her hands. It went exactly as planned. He's trying to lowball me on everything. We got into a fight about the $3,000 he spent on new furniture 10 days before he left. I paused. Her eyes immediately widened, and she took a sharp, involuntary step back. That was the reaction I was waiting for. She knew about the furniture. More than that, she was terrified I had found out its significance. He told me it was a cheap little dresser, I continued, pointing at the dark wood piece. This doesn't look like $3,000, Mom. And this condo doesn't look like the kind of place that needs blueprints for a 3-car garage. I fixed her with a hard stare. Who are the blueprints for, Mom? Are you and Jonathan planning to move into a luxury condo together? On what money? Yours? Or his, money he's trying to steal from me? She suddenly crumpled. Not physically, but her entire demeanor collapsed. The forced cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a devastating mix of guilt, fear, and a strange, desperate defiance. It's complicated, Elizabeth, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. It's just that I haven't felt this needed in years. He pays attention to me. He listens to me. He makes me feel like I matter. I felt a sharp stab of pity and disgust simultaneously. So you destroyed my marriage, Mom? You threw away 8 years of my life because he made you feel needed? He was miserable, Elizabeth. He said you were always so busy with your work, always so focused on your schedule. He said he felt smothered by the routine. He said he just wanted to escape. He didn't want the messy divorce. He just wanted to leave. Her voice was rising now, becoming frantic, her defense collapsing into a desperate plea for understanding. He said that if he left for me, it would be easier. Less ugly. You would blame us, not him, for abandoning the marriage. It was a clean break for him. And I was happy to help. For the first time in 10 years, I felt like I was important to someone. I stood up, shaking my head slowly. The picture was almost complete, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Jonathan hadn't loved my mother, he had used her. He had exploited her loneliness and her need for validation to create the perfect smokescreen for his escape. But the furniture, the $3,000, and the blueprints for a luxury condo still didn't fit the narrative of a man simply running away. There was still a crucial piece of the puzzle missing, a financial motivation so big that he would risk everything. I looked at my mother, who was now openly crying, not for me, but for her shattered fantasy. "You didn't just help him leave, Mom. You were his cover. And I think that $3,000 wasn't a gift. It was a payment. What did he really buy, Mom? And who are those luxury blueprints really for?" I left her standing there, sobbing. I knew the truth was almost within my grasp, and I knew it was connected to the finances, not the emotion. I had a week before the next legal meeting. I needed to find out the real reason for his cold, calculated, $3,000 exit. The confrontation with my mother left me hollowed out, but clear-eyed. Her desperate plea, he didn't want the messy divorce. He just wanted to leave. If he left for me, it would be easier, confirmed the dark truth. Jonathan used her loneliness as an elegant, twisted smokescreen. The moral low of that realization was staggering. But the practical questions remained: the $3,000, the luxury condo blueprints, and his aggressive attempt to strip me of assets in the divorce. A man who simply wanted a clean break wouldn't fight this dirty. I realized I had to stop looking for a story of love or even convenience, and start looking for a story of money and panic. The next 3 days were a frantic, sleepless blur. I ignored calls from my mother, her sobbing messages only made me feel sick, and focused entirely on our finances. I went back to the statement for the Northwood Interiors charge. I called the credit card company, pretending I was confirming a billing error. They couldn't give me purchase details, but they could confirm the type of transaction, a down payment. Not an outright purchase, but a deposit. A deposit for what? I took a risk and Googled Northwood Interiors. It wasn't just a furniture store. It was an interior design firm specializing in staging and furnishing luxury model homes for new developments. That immediately brought me back to the glossy brochures and the 3-car garage blueprints I saw at my mother's place. This whole thing wasn't about a bed or a dresser. It was about an investment, a huge one, and one Jonathan was clearly hiding from me. I drove back to my mother's condo. This time, I didn't announce myself. I used the spare key I still had. The place was empty, she was probably out trying to avoid me. I went straight to the low table where I had seen the blueprints. They were gone. She must have hidden them. But I was right about the brochures. They were still there, tucked under a stack of magazines. They weren't general advertising. They were for a hyper-exclusive, newly constructed community called The Preserve. High-end houses, not condos, starting at over $2 million. Jonathan and I couldn't afford that. Not even close. I checked the fine print on one of the brochures. It listed the name of the developer and the sales office number. I knew I couldn't call directly. Then I had a breakthrough. I remembered Jonathan mentioning a few months ago that his work project had him meeting with several major new clients in the real estate development sector. Specifically, he was doing some advanced system integration for a large development firm. I quickly accessed the encrypted folder on his old laptop, where he kept his business files. I knew his generic password. I dug through his recent project emails. And there it was. A thread from 6 weeks ago, titled, "The Preserve Project, IT and Funding Structure." I scrolled through the emails, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Jonathan wasn't just working for the development company, he was deeply involved in the complex, shadow financing of the project. And then I found the email that changed everything. It wasn't about infidelity. It wasn't even about divorce. It was about embezzlement. The email, sent by Jonathan to an internal address just 1 month ago, the very week I started noticing his secretive behavior, detailed a temporary loan of $450,000 from his firm's client holding account. The stated purpose was to cover an unexpected gap in funding for the preserve infrastructure. He promised to repay it within 45 days. The email was a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, complete with forged authorization codes. He had stolen nearly $500,000 from his firm, betting it all on this ridiculously expensive real estate venture. The $3,000 deposit to Northwood Interiors wasn't for furniture for my mother. It was the initial earnest money deposit on one of those $2 million houses in the preserve. He wasn't running to my mother, he was running away from the collapse of his entire career and the very real possibility of criminal charges. The entire facade, the affair with my mother, the gym bag exit, the cold, aggressive stance in the divorce, was a carefully constructed decoy to mask the far more serious crime. He wanted the divorce to be ugly, public, and focused entirely on the scandalous affair, so that when his financial misdeeds inevitably came to light, it would be dismissed as revenge or emotional damage from a messy breakup, rather than a planned corporate theft. The moral dilemma hit me like a physical blow. I had proof of a major crime. If I exposed him, I would likely lose all our remaining assets anyway, as they would be seized by his company to cover the loss. Jonathan would go to prison. My mother would be exposed not just as a mistress, but as an accessory to a fleeing felon, a co-conspirator who hid the criminal's plans, the blueprints, and covered his exit. But if I kept quiet, let him flee, and went through with the divorce based on his fabricated affair, I might secure a much better settlement, keeping enough money to restart my life. I would be protecting myself, but simultaneously protecting an embezzler and allowing my mother to live with her own, self-inflicted shame, while he escaped justice. I looked at the email chain on the screen. Jonathan wasn't a man seeking freedom, he was a trapped animal trying to claw his way out of a cage he built for himself. And my mother? She was collateral damage, a desperate, lonely woman so starved for attention that she agreed to become the face of his infidelity. My final, desperate realization, the luxury house wasn't for him and my mom. It was his last-ditch attempt to quickly flip the property and repay the stolen funds, or, if that failed, to sell it and flee the country with a pile of cash. The blueprints were hidden at my mother's place because it was the one place he knew I wouldn't suspect, the center of his perfect, emotional decoy. I stood up, the laptop screen still glowing with the evidence of his betrayal. The money was gone, but the truth was finally mine. I had the meeting with his lawyer tomorrow. I couldn't just play the role of the scorned wife anymore. I had to decide, do I expose the monster, destroying all chances of financial stability but seeking justice, or do I use the knowledge to my advantage, ensuring my own survival while letting him escape? I closed the laptop. The real confrontation was about to begin. Not between a husband and a wife, but between a woman and a monster who tried to burn down her life to cover his crimes. The second meeting at Ms. Davies' office felt different. I wasn't the grieving wife anymore, I was the person holding the detonator. I knew the extent of Jonathan's crime, $500,000 stolen from his firm, a panicked investment in a luxury real estate scheme, and the deliberate use of my mother's vulnerability to create a scandalous, emotionally charged smokescreen for his financial fraud. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had framed me, and by extension, my mother, to buy himself time to vanish. I walked in 15 minutes early. Ms. Davies was already there, shuffling papers. Jonathan arrived right on time, wearing the same smug, rested expression. He looked ready to finalize the terms of his clean break, secure in the knowledge that his affair with my mother was the only ammunition I had. The meeting started with Ms. Davies pushing the aggressive settlement terms again. She went on about the unrecoverable breakdown of the marriage and the necessity of moving forward quickly. Jonathan sat back, crossing his arms, looking bored. I let her finish. Then I cleared my throat. My voice was steady, dangerously calm. I've had a chance to review the proposed settlement, I said, looking directly at Jonathan. His eyes flickered, but he held my gaze, challenging me. It's unacceptable. The terms are wildly disproportionate to my contribution to the marital estate. I won't accept anything less than an equitable division of all assets, including the full value of the house, and half of the retirement funds. Jonathan scoffed, a quick, dismissive sound. Elizabeth, be reasonable. You're emotional. You know the circumstances. Just sign the papers and move on. Oh, I'm moving on, Jonathan. I'm moving toward the truth, I countered. And the circumstances are a little more complex than just a scandalous affair. They involve more than just my mother. Miss Davies interrupted, her voice sharp. Mrs. Miller, this is a legal negotiation, not a platform for emotional accusations. It stops being a legal negotiation when one party has fraudulently concealed assets and committed a felony, I stated, my eyes never leaving Jonathan's. Jonathan started to laugh, a short, forced bark. A felony? What in the world are you talking about? Are you threatening me, Elizabeth? Because that won't work. I'm not threatening you. I'm giving you a chance to negotiate honestly before I involve the authorities, I said. I paused for a long, agonizing moment. This was the point of no return. The moral dilemma had to be resolved right here. I had to choose, self-preservation with dirty money, or justice with nothing. I took a deep breath. I know about the preserve, Jonathan. The air in the room didn't just thicken, it froze. Ms. Davies stopped writing. Jonathan's face, which had been smug a second ago, drained of all color. He looked like someone had physically struck him. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The preserve, I repeated, savoring the shock that radiated off him. The luxury development. The one where you made a $3,000 earnest money deposit 10 days before you walked out. The one where you needed the blueprints hidden at my mother's small, perfectly ordinary condo. His lawyer, Ms. Davies, leaned toward him, whispering, "What is she talking about, Jonathan?" He didn't answer her. He was staring at me with a desperate, naked terror I had never seen before. The professional composure was gone. He was just a thief cornered. And I know that to secure that deposit, you needed some liquid cash, I continued, pressing the advantage. I know you took a temporary loan of $450,000 from your firm's client holding account 6 weeks ago to cover an unexpected gap in the project's funding structure. I know the forged authorization codes you used. I have the email chain, Jonathan. The one detailing the embezzlement. I said the last word loud and clear. Ms. Davies shot up from her chair. This meeting is over. We are leaving. But Jonathan was paralyzed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, and for the first time in a month, I saw the genuine fear of consequences, not just the cold calculation of an exit. Elizabeth, please, he croaked, barely audible. We can talk. We can work this out. I looked at him, and I saw 8 years of lies, not just 1 month of betrayal. He hadn't been an emotionally distant but reliable husband, he had been a calculating, self-serving crook who planned to use me and my mother as human shields while he made a fortune, or fled. I couldn't accept dirty money. I couldn't let him walk free. My silence would make me his accomplice. There's nothing to work out, Jonathan. You used my mother's vulnerability to create a cover so scandalous no one would look at your books. You tried to steal our house, our savings, and $450,000 from your employer, all to save your own miserable skin, I said, standing up and pulling the laptop from my bag, placing it gently on the table. You left from me, all right. You were running from everything, including yourself. I didn't open the laptop. I didn't need to. The damage was done. Ms. Davies, I said, addressing the now flustered lawyer. Your client is facing felony charges for corporate fraud and theft. I suggest you advise him to return the money immediately. If the full $450,000 is not repaid to his firm's account within 24 hours, I will be presenting this information to his managing partners, the police, and the district attorney's office. I grabbed my bag and walked to the door. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice shaking. what about Mom? What will happen to Patricia? I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. This was the final twist of the knife, the real resolution. She's your problem, Jonathan. You used her to execute your little plan. She chose to believe your lies because she felt needed. You can tell the police that she was an unwitting accomplice, or you can let her face the consequences of hiding evidence for a felon. That's your moral dilemma now, I said, looking back at his shattered figure. Not mine. I walked out and didn't look back. The story didn't end with a dramatic court case. It ended quietly, messily, as real life does. Jonathan, facing the immediate threat of prison and financial ruin, was forced to act fast. Within 12 hours, the stolen funds were quietly returned to his firm's holding account. He was immediately fired, of course, but the firm, keen to avoid a massive, public scandal that would expose their own lax oversight, didn't press criminal charges. He simply vanished, likely using the last of his remaining liquid funds to escape the country, leaving behind the $3,000 deposit and the $2 million dream. The divorce was settled quickly, painlessly, and in my favor. I got the house and a fair share of the remaining, legally acquired assets. But I lost the one thing I valued most, my family. My mother, Patricia, was devastated, not by the revelation of Jonathan's crime, but by the shattering of her brief, intense fantasy. She had been used, discarded, and exposed as pathetically lonely. I didn't see her for months. The idea of her destroying my marriage for a fleeting sense of worth is a scar that will never fade. I look around my house now. It's quiet. The financial security is there, the legal battle is over, and the monster is gone. But the emotional wreckage is permanent. Jonathan wasn't a monster of passion, he was a monster of calculation. And my mother wasn't a jealous rival, she was a lonely victim who turned herself into a villain. The perfect life was a lie based on a man's silent ambition and a woman's deep-seated need for attention. The $450,000 was saved, but the truth cost me much, much more. I sit here, a woman of 32, financially stable but emotionally homeless, thinking about that last moment with Jonathan. He was so terrified of being exposed as a fraud that he was willing to sacrifice everything, even the comfort of a clean divorce, just to save his skin. He didn't love my mother, and he didn't hate me. He just needed a smokescreen. And I was left to deal with the ashes. The real moral of the story? Sometimes, the most terrifying betrayal isn't fueled by reckless emotion, but by cold, methodical fear of being exposed. And the people you trust most? They're often the most dangerous pawns in someone else's desperate game.